On this week, I have with me Doug Pewitt, who is the head of data science and engineering at User Testing. We're going to cover a variety of topics. We're going to talk about how he goes about building a team, how his social science background has affected the way he looks at hiring and the way he works with products. And just really pleased to have him on. Thanks for being on this week.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. I know I alluded to your background being a little bit non-traditional. I know beforehand we had a little bit of conversation, but I'd love to see you talk a little bit about, how you got that start and kind of the drive that has gotten you here.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I graduated undergrad with a history major and didn't really know what to do 2009 when I graduated. So I started teaching and thinking that I would go to grad school eventually. In between there, I started actually getting really interested in the sociology aspects of history and thinking that that's actually a little bit of a clearer path for me, like thinking about humans, thinking about organizations and how humans organize together to accomplish things. Yeah, so I reached out to this professor at Yale, and he suggested that while there's lots and lots of people who really like thinking about sociology and about people, there's not enough people to do the actual work. And he suggested this very statistics oriented program at Columbia. So I went there and learned that I really do not want to do any more academic work, but that I also learned that data science was a thing. It was just emerging at the time. And it was really this very, very, for me, fascinating combination of both math, and I took a lot of math courses throughout my life, but then real people understanding and using math to model and to understand human problems and products that will ultimately benefit humans through math and statistical techniques. So came out here to Silicon Valley, got a job at a startup. That startup was acquired by LinkedIn, then moved to User Testing, where I am now, to start the data science team here.
I actually love talking to people who have, when I use the word non-traditional, I kind of feel like I need to qualify as that it's a non-technical undergrad degree. At some point you need to pick up the hard skills, but I think you have a different view of problem solving. I guess coming from that background of history and understanding humans and understanding how to solve problems, how has that been a cornerstone of how you view data science, maybe as opposed to if you were coming from like a stats or math or CS background?
Yeah, I think it's the end of the day, all that we're doing, building products and building software and understanding business problems, it really all comes down to people. Without getting too Mitt Romney about it, like organizations are people and we serve people with our organizations. And so really all that we do really is in the very end of the day, a human oriented enterprise. And being able to take that human centered approach to data science really gets you in the mindset of what am I doing to help my users? What am I doing to help my colleagues? How is statistics going to help change the world and change the way that humans work and do business and interact with our products? And instead of data and data science being an end to itself, what really is the impact that we are going for, and how do we model that impact in the course of our work?
I guess when it comes to understanding that problem and maybe, talking about how you approach finding the human story in data products, how is your approach? Like, let's say when you are day to day, you're tasked with an issue, problem, an idea. Where do you start? Like, is it something where you're thinking about the impact first? Or what are you solving?
This is where I think data science and building data products is especially interesting. We, as a software field, have really, really good techniques about understanding users and understanding their needs. And a lot of this is coming out of UX design. Marty Kagan's a huge proponent of really understanding your users and has done a lot of work there. But there's a really important question about how do you do that in combination with what's really, really hard technical work as well in machine learning. And even if you have this, fantastic product idea, there's always going to be a chance that the machine learning just fails. We only get 70% accuracy, but anything less than 90% accuracy just doesn't make sense as a product. And so there's this hugely additional technical risk that I think is really interesting to lay on top of what we see as, at this point, pretty standard user experience design and understanding. And so really the approach that I take with my teams is partnering really, really early with the designers and the researchers and doing the same sort of initial user study and understanding, but then also start ideating very, very early what types of models will work for this situation, start proving out sort of the basic concepts and gathering features and doing some initial modeling work, and then figuring out in conjunction with the product and design teams, how do you create a very, very fast iteration cycle where you produce new data faster, you see what that data means to our users, use that user feedback to improve the model. Maybe you realize that some of your fundamental assumptions are wrong and you actually need a whole different set of truth data because the truth data you were working with initially was answering just slightly the wrong question, and the users don't actually need the answer to that question. They need the answer to a very similar question, but the truth data is entirely different. So getting that feedback cycle early and having that be the central axis really of data product development. Instead of, a data scientist hides in a cave for 3 months and then produces this shining, glorious model that that's great, but you know what? It's slightly wrong. And that slightly wrong might be bad enough to completely doom the project in the end.
Yeah, go off and build a model and hope it fits. When you're looking at your team, and I know you kind of actually, before I ask you, maybe it's a good idea to talk about how you set up your team and give us a little starting point of that, and then kind of dive into that.
So I came from LinkedIn, and LinkedIn did a really great job, especially early on, in separating out two different roles within data science. There's a decision science team and a data products team. The decision science team is focused on more directly the human aspect of data science. You're building models and you're doing data exploration for the use of product managers, for designers, for business decision makers, for people to make decisions, the decision science part, to make decisions based on the outcomes of data and understanding, usually users, but in other aspects of the business. And then data products, where you're using data science for the direct use of an end user. So the model itself is being consumed primarily by computers in order to surface some data or some user experience difference to the end users. So we create this separation because fundamentally there's a really big difference in the type of impact that people want to have. In the decision science case, we are looking for people who really, really care about understanding, especially human understanding problems, understanding people, and their impact is convincing other people that this is a serious part of the business that they need to, either understand better or to make decisions based off of an understanding. And the data products is a little bit more like traditional software engineer, a little bit more like design, understanding users, understanding their use cases so that they can produce a model that will ultimately have an impact for them.
The next question I was going to ask you was about, when you're setting up your team, obviously you're looking for something a little bit different than maybe the traditional data scientist. What's the challenge there when you're looking for somebody and trying to find these qualities in terms of being able to relate to the data side, the human story?
Yeah, it's that fascination and deep interest in products and in humans and in being able to understand these human stories. There's a lot of people, especially coming out of data science, that are really interested in using machine learning to do machine learning. And that's great. And there's definitely a need for that. But then what's the impact of that? The impact for that in our product teams is influencing and being a business leader within the data science function. And that requires a mindset of caring deeply about users, deeply caring about business problems, but for the end goal of working collaboratively with product managers and designers and researchers to understand deeply some human problem. So, right, usually we look very closely for some sort of product experience, maybe some social science experience. I think right now, everyone on the decision science team now, they've all been product managers in previous roles, which is pretty interesting. And that really helps them all a huge amount to understand their customers, which are the product managers, and be able to serve their needs using data science techniques.
Interesting. I guess the question there would be is when you're hiring people, I actually think the product background, I can see how it fits with what you're looking for in the team. Are they coming in with the hard skills, or is it something where you're looking for the product side and you're willing to ramp somebody up on hard skills?
Yeah, that's hard too, because the hard skills are hard. So it's
it's a tricky one, right?
It's tricky, yeah. So we make sure that all of our data scientists go through coding exercises, that they understand statistics, and that they can speak well to statistics. And that's actually even a hard part because You have to understand the statistics yourself, but then you have to convince the product teams that you're working with that what you did makes sense and is reliable. So it's actually, yeah, pretty hard to find people who can do, statistics, product work, and communication work. Like the team we have now is pretty amazing, and it's definitely a very talented and hard to find group of individuals.
I just recalled we were working with somebody who has a similar mindset of the product side is the cornerstone. And the challenge has always been how much you're willing to train versus come in with that baseline skill set. You yourself, obviously, you went from history to getting some of the quantitative stuff in your master's degree, and then obviously going into the field. Do you feel more product people, getting some of that baseline will just make that leap a little bit easier? I mean, is there anything you've seen from, and I guess we're kind of going a little bit divergent, but if product person's trying to get into data science because they have that view of business, is there any skill sets or things that they should be working on?
So in two of the cases on my team, the individuals went from PM roles. They did either a master's degree or a boot camp, and then entered into data science. And so that works, I think, having that dedicated time to spend on getting the baseline skills. In some ways, I'm not sure that like a boot camp is sort of sufficient on its own, but then you combine that with deep domain expertise, you really do have what it takes to have real impact within your organization.
And I guess talk about that impact. So I know the product side, you're very deeply integrated. I know your teams have, different perspective and how they're trying to help solve problems. When you're talking about accountability, so obviously you guys are accountable to somebody. Who are you accountable to from a day to day outside of obviously your team in terms of the product? Like, are you directly working with the product team? Who is it that you're accountable to?
Yeah, so all of our data scientists are essentially embedded onto product teams. The decision scientists are embedded pretty directly and have one-to-one mappings either with product directors or individual product managers. On the data product side, there's usually small groups of data scientists, but connected to the larger strategic objectives of a product group. In terms of the decision scientists being accountable, they really are accountable for informing the decisions, informing the roadmap, making sure that the all of the product team has the information and the data that they need in order to make the decisions they need to make and generally improve the product and achieve their goals. And really, even to help them define what their goals are in the first place is a pretty large function.
So I guess the partnership with the product team is pretty integral. How much discussion or how far up or downstream do they get involved with the actual, backlog discussion, coming up with features? Where does that fit into the day to day for you guys?
The place that we find that we can have the most impact within a product team is in the understanding of an opportunity. So an opportunity is sort of a user or business problem that once solved creates a large impact for the company. So we try to get our decision scientists to be way ahead of where the product development team is that particular day. And obviously there's lots and lots of things that we do sort of on a day-to-day level, like making sure that there's dashboards and tracking and metrics and everything on the day-to-day side. But the place that we find that we are really having an influence on the company is by having a deep understanding of user problems and business problems, maybe 3 months or 6 months ahead of when the product team is actually going to be developing the solution, like at the code level, so that as they get to the solution, they really have an understanding of what are the big problems? What are the big problems worth solving? And then knowing what the overall impact to the business might be once that problem is solved.
Interesting. You mentioned a large impact. Who decides that from your work with the product team and internally? What's the criteria? Who's deciding what's large, what's not large?
So ultimately, it's still the product managers who set their roadmaps and deliver features. And it's our job to make sure that the product managers are thinking as largely as possible about opportunities, about impact. And oftentimes, this means doing a really deep dive on an area that might seem just slightly tangential, or that might be something that's a little bit ahead of where the product team is going. Because oftentimes, product managers or product teams in general are just really focused on what's coming next. Like, how do I get through this sprint? How do I, clear out my backlog? And it's not always possible for them to really spend the deep time to think, what if our users did X instead of Y? What is the potential investment? And really go really deep into that user problem. And we can do that, a little bit ahead of the product teams, and at least, don't tell them what to do, but make sure that they understand that even if they're thinking about this, some of the other things might be worth considering as well.
How often is it that you guys are talking to the product team and realize that you actually helped produce some of those feature sets more than you realize? Is it something that you mentioned you're seeing things a little bit further out? Is it one of those cases those just sit on the backlog when an idea is good and it's there and you kind of work through it? Or is it one of those cases where you guys just have to hold off because obviously you don't want to divert the product from the roadmap that they might have envisioned?
Yeah, it can be a little bit hard to track success in that way. It's very, very satisfying when, the thing that you sort of work hard to frame becomes taken up sort of wholesale by the product team. But very often it's a little bit more subtle, and it's a little bit like just being a constant advocate for users and being a constant advocate for keeping the business front of mind. And so sometimes our impact is a little bit more cultural than it is necessarily like, now we're going to do feature X because feature X is going to lead to this change. But really making sure that, there's a consistent advocate for users and for the impact that each user has on the overall business outcomes for the team.
You mentioned obviously you have a embedded team. They're pretty integral. I was just curious in terms of how your day to day is run with the team. Obviously, they're working pretty closely with product team. How often are you talking to them, checking in, in terms of making sure that they have what they need or they're executing to the best of their abilities?
Yeah, it's so we end up in this matrix organization where they spend most of their time with product teams, most of their time answering questions, doing research. I'm a little bit more there to sort of point out things that might be happening at the department level that suggests where these new opportunity areas might lie, because it takes some awareness to see where every like sort of the large scale directions of the product team as a whole are, so that we know what are interesting research problems as far ahead of time as possible, so that we can start executing that. Largely it's more of support, more working with them on the research and pointing out possible technical possibilities, product possibilities. But for the most part, because we hire really good people, they can be pretty independent in supporting the product teams.
Interesting. I know that one thing we were talking about was that hiring process. And I know we mentioned hiring for that mix of aptitude. Do you kind of think as you guys are solving more problems that, you envision a different type of skill set being needed in terms of, maybe it's somebody who's even less technical, but more product. I don't know if I know the citizen data scientist title has been thrown about. So people who know how to use tools, but can't actually do the modeling. Do you envision people that capability are going to be more common to understanding the domain expertise side of it?
I can definitely see teams and reasons why this might work out. The reason, one of the sort of fundamental philosophies that I work with is that it's pretty important to have a seamless transition between being at the ground, understanding the day-to-day needs of the product team, and using that deep understanding in order to drive the research agenda for the data scientists. My whole theme here is that a data scientist, in isolation, isn't going to really have the impact that product teams need. I mean, I'm certainly an advocate for more people doing more data science, and that's wonderful, but I am a little bit skeptical that without connection to customers, without connection to users and to the business problems, that a data scientist can really be as effective as it could be.
If somebody, I guess, isn't using an embedded model at their current organization, let's just as an example use you guys are, and they want to potentially pivot away from a centralized view, like what are some recommendations you have to kind of start shifting towards getting that connection to the product team, getting them working more one-to-one? Is there steps that somebody could take to kind of start heading towards the way your team is structured?
Relationships certainly are important. Understanding, how the product teams work on a day-to-day level and building up the trust to be accepted as a partner in the day-to-day life. depending on the team structure, yeah, the product manager, the engineering lead, all of the engineers, the designers, and in extreme cases, the user experience researcher too, are all there together and they think of themselves as a team. So, like, how are you contributing to the jobs that each of them have to do? And there's so many opportunities always for somebody who has a data point of view to be able to bring that type of thinking and bring the resources that we have into all of these even little day-to-day discussions. Like I said, it's about relationships really, and about earning the trust of the team. And we can help you on the day-to-day level. Then if we notice something sort of that might be in the background to you guys, but like we really think that this is a huge deal. Like they're more accepting because you're there with them on the small things. You can be with them on the large things as well.
I guess I was going to ask you, I just it popped in my head. I know you mentioned, you were at a startup, you got acquired by LinkedIn, obviously user testing. What's your view of the different, I guess, structure around data science teams? You've operated obviously in a bigger company through a startup acquisition. You're building your own team out at user testing. Is there any takeaways from working at a bigger company that you apply to your day to day? Is there something that you're like, hey, this is the right management side of things to handle?
My experience at LinkedIn shaped so much of what I do and how I work now. It's kind of hard to see what specifically there was there. And, LinkedIn and DJ Patel started data science. So it's actually kind of a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I guess you kind of implemented most of those philosophies, and it might seem seamless to you, I suppose.
It seems a little seamless to me. I think the big lesson from a large organization is what is the outcomes? What is the impact? How is data science actually driving the world of tomorrow? And I think it's where I really saw potentially the limitations of data scientists in isolation and how data scientists in isolation, like what is your path to impact? And there are some teams and especially these big research teams where you produce this algorithm and that's impact for the company because you make $1 billion a year in search. Like, great, that's fine. But if that's not the case, then really understanding where your work drives value is critical and making sure that that's a key part of the job.
Interesting. I think you have a very unique approach to the way your team is set up. And it's interesting how much of your background has shaped that. You know, I speak to people who come from, PhDs in statistics and they have a different view, although they're still solving problems. It seems like the human side for you is the cornerstone of almost everything that you've talked about and thus far. And I think it's interesting how you kind of retain some of that from your undergrad and through those experiences into the rest of the story of you, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's really center. And it's really great. User testing happens to be a really great place for this because we're so committed and focused to bringing human empathy to all business decisions that it's really a core part of who we are as a company, and a data science team that sort of fits along in that mission and is supportive of really the human side of what we're doing. And and sort of in that way being partners with the qualitative research team, because we are a qualitative research platform. We value qualitative research internally very strongly. And the partnership with them, and that partnership both on the machine learning and on the decision science side is pretty critical. So I've ended up in a really good place.
Yeah, you've been there 5 years. It's got to be good. Otherwise, I guess just a curiosity, when you got there, did you know what you got yourself into in terms of like, all right, I've got to build a team. I'm coming from LinkedIn. I had a lot of resources. What was that mindset? Because I know, obviously you've brought the philosophy with you, but showing up, I mean, what were you thinking early days? It's been 5+ years now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had been at Pulse, the news app, which was a small startup before that. So I was pretty undaunted by being the only person doing what I'm doing and trying to figure out for myself, like, what am I going to do here? How am I going to, fit into these teams? How am I going to, drive the impact that I knew I wanted to make? And it's tough work, especially being the first data scientist and trying to create a data culture. And that company has been doing fine for, X number of years before you got there. Like, it takes some substantial work just to get to the point where that trust is built up, that those relationships are set so that you really can bring what you do best and have that be accepted as like, this is actually best for our product, for our users.
Very cool. I guess one question I like to ask different people just to get their takes is, how do you manage to stay current? So I think the number one thing I ask people about, and they're like, can you ask guests of how they stay current? How do they keep up with all the models to apply them, move from theory to application? So what do you do in that to kind of do that?
It's hard. It's hard. The more that my job sort of shifts from day to day model development to managing people who are doing day to day modeling development. I do read Hacker News every day. I have a pretty handy app, and so just scroll through that. The other thing is hiring well. The people that I'm hiring, I can trust, and I know that they're doing their best jobs, and that includes them being passionate and interested in keeping up on models and on what's happening. Then I really learn from them, probably as my primary way of learning.
I think that's actually maybe one of the best ways is hire. I remember one of my first bosses, he said, my goal is to hire people smarter than me because that's the only possible way that I'm going to stay current and involved into my next role. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, hire people smarter than you. That's key.
That is key. Yeah. We could chat for probably a while and cognizant that, I gotta let you get back to your day. I really appreciate you doing this. Like it's been, I feel like if the cameras were off, we'd just be chatting and it was a great conversation. Thank you for being on.
This was great. Thank you.
Awesome. And if somebody has a question from the podcast, do you have a preferred means or avenue that they could maybe reach out and contact you?
I was at LinkedIn, so I'm still super okay with LinkedIn.
We'll include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And yeah, if anybody has any follow-up questions, hit Doug up and then please leave a review on the podcast. Let me know if there's any other questions that are coming to your mind that you'd like me to ask the next guest. And until the next episode, thank you for listening.